Good evening, everyone. I'll call to order the City of Laguna Beach Planning Commission meeting of July 2nd, 2025. May I have roll call, please?
Commissioner Goldman?
Here.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin?
Here.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg?
Yes.
Chair Sadler?
Here. Before we move on to public communications, it's the time of year that we are doing election of officers, in which we'll elect a new chairperson and a new chair pro tem. I would ask if there's any nominations for chair at this point.
I nominate Steve Kellenberg.
Is there a second for that?
A second.
We'll vote on that? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Goldman?
Yes.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin?
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg?
Yes, you do.
Chair Sadler?
Yes. And I spoke with Commissioner Kellenberg before tonight's meeting, and he is allowing me to act as chair for this one final last meeting before we switch at our next meeting, and he will chair from there on out. Is there a nomination for chair pro tem?
Steve Goldman.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Goldman?
Yes.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin?
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Kellenberg?
Yes.
Chair Sadler?
Yes. Okay, so our new chair will be Commissioner Kellenberg, and our new chair pro tem will be Commissioner Goldman. Before we begin with any of our regular items, there is a portion at the beginning of our meeting for public communications. This is a period where any member of the public could come up and speak to the Planning Commission on any item that's under the Planning Commission's general purview, but not on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody who would wish to speak to us about any items other than tonight's agenda items? Seeing none, I will close public communications. We have no items on the consent calendar tonight. So we'll begin with our first regular item, which is item 5.1. And this is a request for a continuance.
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarify, item 5.1 is a consent calendar item. I will give the Planning Commission just a very brief staff report. This item is a request for a short-term lodging unit to be established within an existing single-family residence. It's been a little while since the Planning Commission has considered a request for a short-term lodging unit. And per request from a commissioner, I'll just give a quick reminder on the city's existing regulations. Short-term lodging is essentially a commercial use involving overnight occupancy of a unit for less than 1 month. The term short-term lodging is often used synonymously with Airbnb, which is one of the major booking platforms that exists today. The city last amended its STL regulations in or around 2020. One of the big changes is that moving forward, the eligible zones for short-term lodging are largely the mixed-use commercial districts, and they are not allowed in exclusively residential zones. In the commercial districts, most zones that permit short-term lodging are subject to the granting of an administrative use permit, and hence why the Planning Commission really doesn't review very many of these. In this case, it just so happens that the applicant's request is within the South Laguna Village Commercial Zone, where a conditional use permit is required. As indicated in the staff report, the applicant has requested a continuance due to a potential sale of the project, of the property, excuse me. So at this time, staff is recommending a continuance to a date uncertain. Thank you.
Thank you for the explanation. And I'll open the public hearing. Is there any members of the public who wish to speak on this continuance request? Seeing none, close the public hearing. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I move to continue conditional use permit 25-0959 to a date uncertain.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sadler?
Yes.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin?
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Goldman?
Yes.
Chair Kellenberg.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jingle bell.
Okay, that's a motion for the continuance is granted. And we'll move on to our public hearings. Our only public hearing item tonight is item 6.1, and it's a design review and coastal development permit request. And at 1040 South Coast Highway. And our senior planners, Shavita Sharma, will be providing us with our staff report tonight.
Good evening, Chair Sadler and members of the commission. Item 6.1 is a design review and coastal development permit for a mixed-use project located at 1040 South Coast Highway. The existing building was constructed in 1949 based on city records, and there's an existing laundromat and dry cleaning use that was operating at the site since 1964, but has ceased operation since 2021, and the property is currently vacant. The approximately 2,308 square foot, one-story commercial building is accessed with a 6-car surface parking lot through the rear alley. The property is located within the C1 local business district zoning, and surrounding land uses along the highway are generally commercial in nature, with some properties also providing residential units on the second floor. Properties across the alley are zoned local business professional, but the existing land use is predominantly residential. As can be seen on the aerial imagery, the commercial uses in the area include several resident-serving businesses. The Planning Commission previously reviewed a concept review for this project at the February 2nd, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Comments from the public noted concern with privacy and views. There was support for the project, specifically the residential use from the public. Planning commissioners were also supportive of a mixed-use concept at this location. There was direction given to eliminate the proposed tandem parking, which has been eliminated from tonight's design, as well as additional comments to address privacy, view, and design articulation for the proposal. Since this project was reviewed by the Planning Commission in 2022, Ordinance number 1712 has been adopted by the city and was certified by the Coastal Commission at the May 7th, 2025 hearing. The infill provisions allow for the commercial projects to include residential projects to allow the same commercial setbacks. Additionally, there would be no requirement for the additional building setback for residential uses in the commercial zone. Units that are less than 700 square feet and within a quarter mile of a transit stop have a requirement for half a space per unit. Major remodels for additions do not apply, and therefore nonconformities would not need to be brought into compliance. And there is no requirement to include affordable housing for projects with less than 10 units. The project proposed tonight is a remodel of the existing one-story commercial building with a upper level addition of 2,387 square feet. There would be 4 one-bedroom units included on that upper level, the interior remodel of the ground floor commercial space, as well as an exterior facade updates. There'd be site improvements to the parking lot, including 4 new bicycle lockers, trash storage, and landscaping improvements. There is an elevated deck proposed for the second floor residential area along South Coast Highway frontage and proposed HVAC equipment. The property is well integrated along the highway frontage, and the second floor would be set back over 12 feet from the street and conveys a well-articulated appearance along the street frontage. The building contains adequate articulation and design changes at the rear elevation to avoid a monolithic appearance, and the rear elevation will maintain sufficient separation from the adjacent residential units across the alley to address privacy concerns. The colors and materials are consistent with a contemporary architectural style and contribute to the building's high-quality appearance. Within the context of the development pattern on South Coast Highway, the subject property is comparatively low profile, but achieves a similar maximum high envelope with the proposed addition. As analyzed in the staff report, the project is consistent with all design review criteria. Additionally, the project is also consistent with zoning code requirements with respect to setbacks and heights for the zone. The project is in compliance with coastal development permit review criteria and findings. And the project is also in compliance with all applicable policies in the city's general plan and local coastal program. Importantly, this project advances identified housing and land use elements, policies, and goals of the city. The zoning code allows a reduction in required parking when a proposed use incorporates innovative parking solutions. Any proposed innovative parking demand management does require mitigation measures at an equivalent ratio to the parking spaces required by the proposed intensification of use. In this instance, the parking reduction being requested is 1 space or 14% from the required 7 spaces, and 6 spaces are being provided. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend City Council approval of the reduction of 1 space through the inclusion of TDM strategies for the project. Since publication of the staff report, 1 public comment letter has been provided and is attached to the agenda, stating concerns regarding the lack of affordable housing at the low, very low, and extremely low income levels for the proposed project. That concludes my presentation. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission approve DR 10-25-1044 and Coastal Development Permit 25-1045 and find said action exempt from CEQA. I'm available to answer any questions, as is the project applicant.
Great. Thank you for that, Shavita. Are there any commissioner disclosures at this point?
Yeah, I met with the applicant's architect, Mr. Lassiter.
I met with Mr. Lassiter and Mr. Hanauer and Elizabeth Hanauer.
As did I.
I did as well.
I did not. Okay.
You're demoted.
Yeah,
They're fired.
are there any questions of staff at this point?
I have a few.
Mr. Dubin?
The previous tenant being, it was a laundromat and dry cleaner, and I know some of these questions may be redundant for the applicant because I asked them when I met, but is there any environmental testing being considered for any kind of forever chemicals due to the dry cleaners and air quality testing or any proposed remediation associated with the testing?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. That is something that staff considered. This project does not involve any grading activities. The ground floor is simply being remodeled and is remaining a commercial use. The property is not on what's known as the Cortese list. The project was not subject to any environmental assessment requirements.
Okay, just wanted to check. My other curiosity is under the CEQA, staff recommends Class 3 exemption under minor alterations. And I'm wondering, due to the fact that the addition is almost 2,400 square feet, how did you come to the conclusion that this was a minor alteration?
I believe you're referring to Class 3, 15303. 15303 does allow for new construction. That would still be considered in that exclusion exemption because it's infill development on a site of less than 5 acres. And so under CEQA, there are no additional triggers, such as being on the Cortese list or some other qualifiers that would prevent it from being considered for an exemption.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Let's see. That's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yes, in 2022, we discussed the additional setback required because of the Coast Highway right-of-way. Could you address that?
Certainly. So in 2022, when this project was originally brought for a concept review, there was an additional building setback required as part of the housing element policies for infill development that have now been certified by the Coastal Commission, that additional building setback no longer applies to mixed-use housing projects.
As a part of the new ordinance?
Correct, ordinance number 1712.
Okay, and how does the parking ordinance 1702, is that a part of this application? Or does it apply?
No, this project is taking advantage of ordinance number 1712 that allows them to only have a parking requirement of half a space per unit because all units are 700 square feet or less, and the project site is within a quarter mile of a transit stop.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kellenberg?
The request and granting of the reduction of one space based on the traffic management plan, was that notion and that program, was there any, maybe you said this and I missed it, but was there a peer review, a third party kind of evaluation of that?
Yes, there was a parking transportation demand management plan that was submitted by the applicant, and that study was peer reviewed and found to, the analysis and conclusions were found to be supported, and formed the basis of staff's recommendation for the one space reduction that is being requested.
And is there any measures or conditions that somehow monitor that or measure the fact that it's actually occurring over time?
There are enforcement mechanisms to ensure that the transit vouchers that are being proposed and required of the commercial tenants are included as a condition of approval when it goes before the city council. There are no mechanisms that would require reporting back to the city that the transportation demand management is effective. However, if there were issues with parking, staff would be aware, just because typically we would get concerns from the community.
And was there a consideration of utilization of some of the retail parking spaces for residential after hours?
I believe there's, that was looked at as part of the overall project. There's nothing in the conditions of approval to really enforce that because it's ultimately the commercial tenants would have to ensure compliance and by the residential tenants to make sure that they aren't using those spaces when they're not allowed to, and how that's allocated and monitored would be up to the commercial tenant.
We can talk about that with the applicant. And I guess the last one is, and I'm trying to pull up the plan set right now, but it's moving slow. The landscape plan, remind me, are there any street trees being proposed?
The parking space in the rear is relatively small, and there are no,
In the front along PCH?
there aren't any being proposed as part of this project.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on the enforcement of the TMD, that condition will be added at the city council level, but not through planning.
Correct. The enforcement would be for the conditional use permit for the transportation demand management, because that's the entitlement process, and that CUP is only before city council, is not before the planning commission this evening.
That's in relation to the reduction of the space.
Yeah.
I didn't have a question, but I do have a follow-up question on something that was with Commissioner Kellenberg. Did I hear you say that there may be restrictions on residents when they can park in those spaces?
There may be restrictions that the commercial tenant looks at, but there's nothing within the city scope that's required as part of our conditions of approval for the TDM.
Okay, so the building manager could essentially allocate the use of the spaces how they wanted to?
Correct. As part of the project, they're only required to have a half a space per unit, so the remainder of the spaces are intended for that commercial tenant.
Okay.
I just was asking for clarification on some of the stuff regarding the transportation demand management. The table that was shown on page 5 of the staff report, I think is incorrect, right? Because it's saying 7 spaces required, parking provided -6, and then TDM reduction -1 space, and then it says total required. It still says 1 space there on that table. That should be 0, correct?
Correct. That should be zeroed out.
Okay, and then on page 19, where it shows, that similar table again, in the sentence above that table, it says for these reasons, staff recommended that Planning Commission recommends City Council approval of the reduction of 5 parking spaces through the inclusion of TDM strategies for the project. That should say 1.
One, correct.
Okay, I was just getting a little confused there, so I just wanted to follow up on that. Any additional questions? Okay, thank you. To the applicant team, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Sadler, and congratulations on your relief from your post. You've done a great
Former
job.
Chair Sadler.
Yes, exactly. And thank you to staff. Everybody's been really helpful in preparing this staff report and very thorough, and we appreciate it. Do you have our presentation ready, please? Thank you, Shveta. So it's been a little while since we saw you guys last in 2022, 3 years, and a lot has changed, primarily in the way we're thinking about this upper floor. And we took to heart much of what the commissioners had to say about the mass and scale of the upper floor. Next slide, please. So it includes changes to the lower floor as well in terms of reductions in size. At our concept review hearing in 22, we had about 2,300 square feet downstairs. And with the next slide, please, you'll see the current lower floor that accommodates handicap accessible parking and handicap access into the lower structure. We've reduced the size somewhat to 2,273 square feet. Next slide, please. That reduction also extends to the upper floor, where in 22, we proposed to you 5 residential units that went from property line north to property line south, and from as far forward as we could at the street to as far back, basically, as we could on the property. And we've reduced that quite a bit. The next slide will show we've gone from 5 units at 3,100 square feet to 4 units at 2,300 square feet. We did that by reducing how far out the units came towards the street, how far out the units came towards the alley, how far out the units came towards the side property lines, and we've pulled the sides away from those property lines by 3 feet, with the goal of helping reduce the mass and scale, to provide some corridor for views to the sides of the building, and to create a greater amount of articulation as the commission had requested. Next slide, please. Something that we did want to bring to your attention today has to do with providing handicap accessibility throughout all 4 of these units. And one thing we've noted is that we may need just about a 2.5-foot extension at the back of the property. Depending on what the commission's perspective is on what we're doing today, we were going to suggest that you allow us to have that addition of space, which allows us to redistribute some areas within the bathrooms. We've learned that we must provide handicap accessibility to all of these units, which we do through a lift to get to them, and then once inside them, we've got paths of travel to conforming bathrooms. Next slide, please. So this is the front of the building as it was originally proposed 3 years ago. And you can see that upper floor extends from property line to property line, left to right. Next slide. This is the proposal today. And I think it's pretty clear to see how the reduction in the width of the project, stepping the project back from the street some, and articulating the roof form has created less mass and scale for the upper level of what's proposed. Next slide. Likewise, at the back of the property, this was the proposal facing the alley. And the next slide will show that with our reduction, next slide, please. Thank you. With our reduction along the alley face by pushing the building back more than 12 feet, by pulling the 2 sides in 3 feet, we've really created a more articulated and smaller mass and scale on this side of the building as well. Next slide. This slide demonstrates that additional 2 feet that I mentioned earlier as that small little pop out. And if you visited the site, you may have noticed there's some green stakes or green ribbon that outline that additional area. So we can talk about that a little further if there's any questions. Next slide, please. I did want to point out that we've been discussing solutions for our art in public place requirement. And namely, we've been talking to local artist Marlo Bartles about including some beautiful mosaics at the property. And one thought we had was creating some columnar elements at either side of the building's facade that would come down and engage with the sidewalk. This is a rough rendering of what that might look like, doing a white on white kind of idea that Marlo has done before. The next slide will show some examples of that. Here's one of Marlo's installations doing a white on white. And the next slide will also show a local bench and wall that he's done in that same theory. Next slide, please. This is an excerpt from the TDM plan. I know you guys are a little bit interested in how that works, and it does have some specific requirements that we provide, or that the retail tenant provides vouchers and information about public transportation to residents and users of the building. Next slide, please. The TDM plan did tell us that we do meet the requirements of parking, so we've satisfied that with this implementation. Next slide. And that's the end of our proposal, before and after, where it is now. It's a sad, dark black hole along what is otherwise a really beautiful part of our city, and it would be great to see this project re-energize it. I ask for your support. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions of the applicant team at this point?
I just have a clarification question. You mentioned on the art columns, you said either. Would it be either, or would you do both?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean either. It was proposed as two columns
Yeah,
vertically. Yeah.
That's what I thought. That's because that's what we were talking
Yes.
about on site.
And to clarify, since we're on the subject of that, the commission isn't acting on anything in regard to the art in public places tonight. We just wanted to bring it to your attention as it's something we're exploring, and to maybe hear any comments that you might have about it.
I guess following up on that, are you at this point committed to providing some sort of art, or are you still deciding whether to do that or the in lieu fund?
I think we're deciding between the two. However, the property owner and the artist, Marlo, are both very excited about the idea that he could do something. He is sort of at the sunset of his career and has left a mark along the city, that's really amazing. And it would be nice to have a beautiful example of his work before he retires. So we're committed to trying to find a way to incorporate his work and do it in a way that's not just a lick 'em and stick 'em, if you will, but really integrated into the building and something that engages with the public.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is a question for you or for staff. Regarding the transportation demand management plan, why does it specifically apply just to the commercial tenants of this building rather than everybody, all the tenants of the building, including the residential tenants?
I don't think I have an answer for that. I would defer to staff.
So the enforcement mechanism and the condition of approval would apply to the commercial tenant in that they are required to provide these transit vouchers, because the residential tenants will turn over with time, so they would not be the ones responsible for providing transit vouchers to themselves. That combined with the bicycle parking spaces to encourage alternative modes of transportation is the analysis that was used to support the reduction of that one space.
Okay, so those bike lockers, for example, those are specifically for the commercial tenants only? And
The bike lockers are not, but the transit voucher requirement would be on the commercial tenant's responsibility to provide those to their employees to encourage alternative modes of transportation to and from the site.
okay, so as far as you're concerned, the residential tenants could potentially use these bike lockers as well?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I know the project is not required to provide an affordable unit, but has there been any consideration at all out of, just trying to help that situation in the community to potentially deed restrict one unit for, an undecided period of time for an affordable unit?
Unfortunately, it's hard to make it work now,
Okay.
literally. The 5 apartments were workable and one would have been affordable.
Mhm.
But with 4, there will be no project. I mean, literally, it's very thin right now.
Okay. I just wanted to ask that question. As far as the HVAC on the roof, I know that those units have gotten very quiet and stable, but are you considering any kind of either sound or vibration mitigation for those units?
That level of technical detail hasn't been explored yet, but as we discussed earlier when we did meet, I think that's an excellent idea, and I would want for the tenants of that upper level to enjoy peace and quiet, and they can certainly be isolated. And perhaps the roof element, the low roof element on which they sit, surrounded by the higher roof, could be of reinforced concrete, which would be a mass dampening method that could help create less vibrations through the building.
Sometimes they build a little platform that's isolated from the rest of the roof via either a rubber or some kind of
True.
floating mechanism of some sort.
And the other thing to consider is that each of these units are actually quite small. They're heat pump units, and since the units themselves, each of the apartment units are quite small, so in some sense, they're affordable by nature, if you will, because of the size of the units. But their size also means that the heat pump itself can be quite small. So while there are 4 compressors, one for each of the unit, they're actually quite small compressors, not like sort of the normal 5-ton large machines we're
Right.
typically seeing in large homes.
But there's 2 for the commercial
Correct.
space as well.
Exactly.
Okay. And I know that when we met, you did have some actual material sample. I'm assuming you got those.
I brought those tonight as well. If the commission would like to see them, I'd be happy to pass them around.
Is there any concern? I've been doing some research on for another project regarding anodized aluminum, and I know you have that on the fascia, and I'm assuming the roof, the metal roof, is also that. They're suggesting that depending on the environment that we're in, and of course we're in a coastal environment, that there could be potential degradation of that material within 10 to 20 years. Do you have any concerns about that?
No, we did look into that, and the material that we're proposing here would be an aluminum, but it would be a painted aluminum, a Kynar finish painted aluminum. Kynar, we did some research on this. The Kynar 500 finish is a multi-layer painted finish that is intended for marine environments. So unlike the anodized aluminum, which is an electroplating type process,
Right.
this is it's a powder coated and baked on finish. So I think we'll find that it'll last quite a bit longer.
Okay. Let's see. That's it from me.
I spoke to you about this earlier today, Anders, but when I went out to the site this afternoon and looked at the story poles and the relationship of the alley story poles to the buildings across the alley, the neighbors across the alley, it occurred to me, and if you look at sheet A1.1 of your plans, it occurred to me that the setbacks between your proposed building and the existing neighbors could be flipped to provide more privacy for the neighbors. So if you look at sheet A1.1, you see that the north half of the building is set back 35 feet from the property line and 41 feet from the neighbor. So that is 73 feet total between those two building faces. The south is a different situation. That situation is the building faces are closest together. And that distance between those two buildings is 46 on your plan. If you were to, did you consider flipping the floor plan so that the offset is reversed? And there is a greater distance between the building on the other side of the alley and the south side, the south edge of your building?
Yes, after we spoke, I did take a look at the idea of switching or mirroring, if you will, that upper plan. To be clear, the reason the plan is the way it is now is that the location of the lift and the stairs, the vertical circulation elements, are driven to a degree by the existing shed, the existing extension of the back of the building that's in that parking area. Our intent was to maintain that, and so the stairs and that lift were adjacent to that, which pushed them a little bit further to the north, giving us greater area on the south with which we could extend that unit back. So that was the driving factor in that. In looking at the site plan and seeing the relationship that you'd mentioned about the neighbor to the south extending closer to the alley, and the neighbor to the north receding from the alley, we looked at the notion of flipping the upper floor. It will work very well, actually, if we were to flip the upper floor, but we would also need to flip that stair and that lift, which means we would need to flip the program of the storage shed that's down below. To the other side, essentially just flipping the back of the lower floor as well as the upper floor. Architecturally, and I think physically, it would be quite easy to achieve. I think you're right, it would balance out the distances between the residences and distribute it a little more equally across the alley. So from that perspective, I think it's a great idea. I would want to confirm with staff whether or not that causes any other pain, but I don't think it would, given the nature of it's already considered, I believe, a major remodel. So I think we would be able to do that from staff's perspective. We could certainly do it from the architectural perspective.
Let me add that that extension, the existing extension, is something that we were planning on sort of rebuilding in place because the rest of the building is very sound physically. It doesn't look that way, but it is. But that portion of the back is pretty nasty. So what we would do is take it, build exactly what we were going to sort of rebuild on that one side and put it on the other side.
Yeah, because
But it's a good idea.
it
It's a
would
good
be,
idea.
it would be more equitable
Yeah, no,
in
no,
the sense
it's a great
that
idea.
the distance between the north half, distance between two buildings would be 63 feet now instead of 73, and the south half would be 58 instead of 46.
Mhm.
And that increase in 12 feet, I think is
Sure,
significant
I agree.
for the privacy, but we'll discuss it.
No, we like it.
Any questions?
We like it.
I was just wondering if when we talked the other day, we talked about what I brought up just earlier, and that is potentially, even though there's no requirement, you've met the parking requirements, assuming that the TDM is granted. Are you considering, or would you consider allowing those retail spaces to be potentially used in the evenings, off hours after the retail businesses are closed?
Yes, the thought is, no, it's the right thing to do and it's a good idea.
I mean, it's kind of a dangerous thing in a way, because the idea is, we also talked about you assigning the two spaces to specific units. And so the renters in the other units, the idea is they don't have a car.
Mhm.
So if you kind of open the door to shared, well, then it kind of
Sure.
opens the door to, well, maybe we can kind of have a car and make it work. So
Sure.
I'm
Yeah,
not, I'm not even sure it's a good idea.
No, no, but and therein you'll appreciate my answer. And that is, our thought is, and we discussed it a lot, is to have reality, the market, help inform just how that may work.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm certain that there's a way for it to work, but exactly what that is and what those hours are and things like that, we'll learn. I mentioned when we were together that at another building that we have in town, we found with these are smaller apartments. And with the one-bedroom apartments, a lot of people don't have cars, especially because of this location. And, if they're one bedroom, they're on a tighter budget. And, with public transportation and Laguna Local, there are options. But it's something definitely worth exploring, and we'll discuss it with the retail tenant as part of a lease negotiation.
That's going to depend on what
And-
their business is.
Yeah, no question.
What do you think, Joe, is the demographic of the residents? I think in the last report, I think I asked the same question. I think the answer was young and senior,
Young and
not
senior.
much in the middle. Is it
Uh,
still the same?
Yes, it is. And the hope is that it is those two, because those are the two that have needs.
Yeah.
People that have lived in town a long time need to sell their home because of the equity in their home. And they can stay right in the heart of right in the middle of town.
Yeah.
And young people, we want to have a place for them. So that's the hope. But the market will tell us.
Great. Any additional questions?
Just quickly, I know in the original staff report that for some reason the landscape plan was not part of it, but I know you have one. Do we want to take a look at that?
I wasn't done with my questions, but that was going to be my next question is,
Yeah.
was there a landscape plan submitted? Because I can't find one.
Yeah, it was updated.
Just, we got a supplemental report.
Oh, it's in the supplement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a landscape plan provided, reviewed by the landscape reviewer, and it went through some design changes along the path over the last couple of years as well. And I believe it was just a simple oversight on staff's part that it wasn't included, but it's definitely there.
Could there be any consideration of adding an additional street tree to the one that's out there?
I told you he was going to ask that question.
I'll let the landowner answer that.
No. Well, there's been consideration, but the conclusion was not to. Now, sometime in the future, because I love trees, when our concept of the size of trees and the canopies start to take into consideration merchants and retail and signage, that'd be terrific. But currently, that's not the case. And as a result, there's a number of problems where the street trees obscure visual access.
So we shouldn't have any street trees in Laguna Beach
No.
where there's retail?
No,
That's what you're saying.
don't quote me
Okay.
there. No.
I think what you're saying is you want to maintain your optionality to put the trees after you get the tenants and then make it all work. Is that what you're saying?
Better said. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Much more elegantly.
That's a first for me.
I am finished now.
Everybody finished? Questions? Okay, I'll open it to any members of the public who wish to speak on this item. Please come forward. You'll have 3 minutes. Step up to the podium. You'll see some lights there. When the light turns yellow, that means you have 30 seconds left. When it flashes red, that means your time's up. And
3 minutes?
yes.
Thank
And then after you're done speaking, if you could print your name on the sheet that's on the table behind you so that we get your spelling of your name correct for the minutes. And if you could give us your name.
Annette Davis. I'm the resident, along with my husband, at 1037 Glen Area, which is literally right behind the lot. We were part of the hearings in 2022 as well. So we do see a significant improvement over the existing, but one of our concerns is the congestion that we brought up in the initial hearing. And in theory, the TDM may work, but in practice, since we've lived there, we understand there's an alley that the trash goes through there. There's residents that walk across the alley. There's deliveries to the commercial buildings there. There's a huge pedestrian element in that alley back there. There's active culture in all the residents. So our concern is not only congestion, but safety for the pedestrians. I just don't see how the half a space per unit is even workable, because there's to be affordable for people, there'll be 2 people minimum in a 700 square foot apartment. So while it's walkable and bikeable, people need cars. So where are they going to park? I understand the bicycle thing. Laguna is not a bicycle town. Let's face it. It's not a safe place. Look in the summer. Every day I'm getting something from Coast Highway that there's been a collision. It is not a bikeable town. So again, in theory and practice, they're 2 completely different things. And we know from our own personal experience. So, and I know there's the 6 spaces. I don't even know if there's a handicap space, if that's all grandfathered in. The exemption under 15303 is not even applicable because it's a major construction. This is not minor. So I don't even know how that comes to play. It is a major addition with more than 50% of the existing structure. So I think it's a really far stretch to even be using that exemption for this project. It's clear that something needs to be done. It's you know, we'd love to have some improvement to that building right now, but I don't think this plan is workable for that location. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to bring up. I guess my time's up. So that's all I want to say is the congestion was one of our big issues. Privacy was one, but I think the mitigation of sound of the AC units on top would also be a huge issue because ground floor space, just to cool that, is going to have a huge unit on top. We have a lot of experience living behind a commercial building in other locations, and it's a huge concern with sound mitigation. So, but the primary thing for us was the congestion and the safety of residents.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Please come forward.
Yes, good evening. My name is Christopher Davis. I also am owner 1037 Glen Eyrie behind the building that's being proposed. Just also with regard to the cars, the parking, the traffic, the Uber, the Amazon deliveries, all the other stuff that apartment dwellers need. They want to have their toothpaste, whatever, delivered by a truck. That's going to be back and forth all day, not to mention the fallacy of believing that there's people out there who don't have cars and don't drive around town or leave town. I think that's ridiculous. And to have that woven into the proposal as a sort of a underpinning of allowing this whole project to go forward is a complete ridiculous fallacy. But also, I have a question for staff, though. I think the conclusion that we heard, was that the CEQA requirements do not apply here, and that was sort of reviewed by outside counsel. Is that what I heard from staff?
We'll ask when you're finished speaking.
Yeah, I was just wondering who reviewed it, who were the peer reviewers, if it was BBK or whoever, since they're affiliated with the city and the council as well. So I would just like to know that, and if there's also the analysis that was done legally for all the waivers and requirements that were being avoided. Are those analyses available to the public that the council went through and the outside council went through? Or is it just a conclusion that we're allowed to see? Are those documents available?
We'll ask staff when.
Okay, yeah. I was also checking with the city clerk, I suppose, on that. Also with regard to the AC units, I understood that the proposal is 2 for the commercial down below and 1 each for these upper units. That's 6 AC units on one small parcel facing us. And I don't believe those units are going to be put on the sidewalk on PCH. So they're going to be somewhere blowing backwards, especially with the ocean air blowing backwards. So 6 units, you know, if you're familiar with AC units, slightly smaller or smaller capacity doesn't translate to quieter. It just means they're cheaper. So you're compounding 6 AC units blowing in a narrow little corridor direction. It's going to be very, very loud for the residents, of which we are one of. So that's kind of all I had to say. And also with regard to the 0.5 space, I understood that to mean that it was for a 700 square foot structure. And this is, of course, much larger. How did that get shoehorned in? Are we dividing these up as pertaining to different buildings? Or I'd like to, have more thought on that. So that's kind of all I had to say. But we're kind of not very impressed with the changes that were made. I don't think it's enough, and I don't think the project goes forward and is workable, especially with regard to the parking and all the other issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let me get my name.
Next speaker.
Hi, Barbara Bowler, 1025 Catalina between Anita and Oak. First, my neighbors and I are in favor of this project. I've been living in the village for over 30 years. Fortunately, we've had some really good upgrades in the neighborhood during this time, like the Pottery Shack turned out pretty good. This renewal, but between Anita and Oak, it needs to be updated. The laundromat, if you look through the windows, it looks pretty bad. So this renewal would really help the businesses that are already there, and it will add new businesses, and it will add much needed housing. Just this week, a friend of mine called me and said that her dad wanted to move into town to be closer to her family. She asked me if I knew of something, something small and nice. I said, well, no, But I thought that this would be really perfect for somebody like her dad. And we know that the longtime Laguna seniors now are selling their houses and or have already sold their large houses and are downsizing to more accessible places closer to town. This location has got easy access to public transportation and is very walkable. Perfect. The design and the look of the project seems to fit in well with its surroundings. I went by there and looked at the story poles too, and I thought, you know, it looks pretty good. We really want our neighborhood to look and feel vibrant and healthy again, and we hope you can speed up this process to get the project moving. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other additional speakers? Seeing none, back to the applicant team. You have 3 additional minutes for anything you'd like to add or anything you'd like to respond to.
Yes, I think some of the primary questions the neighbors had was regarding the air conditioning at their location and how to sound dampen them. As they're currently proposed, they're within the very center core of the upper floor building on a lower roof element hidden by and surrounded by the higher roof element, really in a donut hole, intentionally put there to keep them out of view and to isolate them from the rest of the neighborhood with the rest of the building mass surrounding them. So I think that they'll find that despite the fact that there are 6 units, they're not all 6 operating in synchronicity at the same time. They are smaller units that are quieter and will run more efficiently than larger units, and they won't be blowing or visible or really in the path of sound to the other neighbors because of the location within the core of the building. So we took that into account very seriously when we designed it this way, and I think it's a good solution.
Yes, and there were 2 other comments made. One about handicap space, and so the neighbors are aware there is a handicap space with a get-out space next to it that's being proposed. And also the half a parking space per unit, since there's 4 units, that's really half per unit. So there's 2 parking spaces for residential. And I started to say, but I didn't finish my comment earlier, but the comments made by the neighbor reminded me about it. And that is that being intimately familiar with other residential properties in town, the 1-bedroom, especially the smaller ones, do have a lot of people without cars. One of the properties that we own, less than about 40% of the parking spaces are actually used. So the smaller units, you know, we think this is going to work fine for that purpose.
Great, thanks. Anything else you'd like to add, or is that it?
No, we'll answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, well, maybe staff can weigh in on it. There was a couple of comments or questions regarding, one again, about the CEQA analysis, you know, and how that was done and how staff arrived at the exemption that they came up with. And I think there was also just a question about parking and how it's figured, but it's based on the parking code, correct? So I don't know, let you respond any further to as you want.
Perfect. Yeah, Chair. So I'll go ahead and take the CEQA question and then defer to Madam Senior Planner or Mr. Planning Manager. So the CEQA process for all projects, once again, in conjunction with the City Attorney's Office, planning staff makes our recommendation. You all, as the city's decision-making body, make the ultimate call. So once again, the CEQA recommendation, which my office stands behind, supports, worked in conjunction with planning. As to the substance, CEQA regulation 15303, and I'll be brief here, list explicit examples. It's not limited. It basically says the following are subject to this, includes but are not limited. Subsection B explicitly states residential structure totaling no more than 4 dwelling units, and in urbanized areas, which we are here, this exemption applies to similar structures designed for not more than 6 dwelling units. So once again, our office, in conjunction with planning, feels very, very comfortable that in this recommendation. However, of course, you guys are the city's ultimate decision maker. And I do just want to correct one thing. It's somewhat of a misnomer to say when we say we have a CEQA exemption that the city is not going to apply CEQA. We are applying CEQA in this case. We are recommending an exemption, which is part of the statutory and regulatory regime. So I hope that answers the question. I'll defer to staff on the other parking question.
Yes, I believe the neighbor had concerns as to how the parking space was calculated and where the 700 square foot comes from if the upper level addition is 2,307. So the requirement is twofold. It's only a half space per unit if each individual unit is no more than 700 square feet. So for the 4 units, all of them range between about 550 square feet to 700 square feet. And so because they don't exceed 700 square feet, all 4 of those units have a parking requirement of half a space per unit, which equals 2 required parking spaces for the proposed residential use on the upper level.
Okay. Which of the units was the largest one? And with the proposed expansion that Anders, you had spoken about earlier, that wouldn't push that particular unit over 700, would it?
No, the proposed expansion was going to be distributed in an aggregate fashion across the entire building as it gathered space within the clearances required for the bathrooms to be accessible. So I would not expect that unit would go over 700 square feet, no.
Okay. And if it did, would that affect then the parking requirements?
Yes, it would, Chair. So what we would ask the Planning Commission is if that's the direction that the commission majority wishes to move the project in, that you continue the project. Part of the time between now and that subsequent hearing would be to review the plans, confirm consistency with applicable zoning regulations. We would ensure that parking requirements are met. And additionally, there was the additional outrigger staking that was installed in the contrasting ribbon color. That would also ensure that that staking would have been installed for and certified for a minimum 21-day period prior to the hearing at which a decision was rendered, which would satisfy a zoning code requirement.
What you're saying, Anthony, is we can give approval like a concept approval on that, and they would come back for formal approval of that alteration to the plans that were submitted?
Our recommendation would be to continue the project in its entirety. And then that decision would be your final decision. If someone felt the need to appeal that decision to the city council, whether it's the applicant or an interested party, a neighbor, there would be a stable project, a well-understood project by all parties, and that would just ensure a clean appeal proceedings with plans that have been reviewed, posted, and also analyzed for consistency with zoning regulations and all applicable approval findings in a staff report that would be posted with the meeting agenda.
So what you're saying is you think it will be more efficient and ultimately more likely to proceed with proper public notice, approvals, et cetera. If we didn't approve the project as planned tonight, we continued it, and then it came back with this modification. That's your recommendation?
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
With, of course, the caveat, you guys are free to
Right.
engage subsequently in the other components and give any other thoughts or comments you may have.
Would the applicant like to comment on that?
Thank you. Yes, and I totally respect what the planning manager said, and I respect him. But I'd suggest another way of dealing with this. If we bifurcate the issues, one deals with this question of the additional parking space. In other words, if any of the units exceeded 700 square feet, that a full parking space would be required. So that's one issue. The other one dealt with the staking. Okay, and I think I hope that you would agree that it would make more sense to approve the project with the understanding that if any of the units exceeded 700 square feet, that such unit would demand a parking space, a full parking space. And then separate from that, regarding the staking, yeah, because that staking wasn't noticed, come back, whatever it is, 21 days, and people will have seen the staking and the difference it makes. It makes very little, and it's lower than the roof line, and just bifurcate it so that we isolate really what we're talking about instead of starting over again in 21 days, which doesn't make any logical sense to me.
Is there any, as Commissioner Whiten suggested, flipping that?
Yeah.
How would you want to deal with that? Because that seems like it's kind of a change, obviously, from what you're proposing tonight. Even though we understand what that change is, it's basically just a mirror of what the rear of the building.
Sure.
So
No, it's a good
maybe
point.
that's a staff question.
If the planning commission directed the applicant to make such a revision to the project, the normal course of things would be that you would continue the project with the direction to restake this redesign, and it would return to the planning commission for a review and a decision.
That would be with it, put aside the extension, that would be just with, we'll call it the Susan flip.
Correct, yes.
Well, first of all, is that something you would even want to do? I mean,
Yes, no, actually, it's a great idea.
Okay.
So no, again, I think it provides relief to the property closest to the alley. No, it's a good idea. And we talked about it at length, and unless we find some reason why, and I don't think there is, we both feel it's going to work,
Okay.
we would move forward with it.
The reason would be that you have to come back.
Right. Well, that'll be part of our discussion, our final discussion.
But the staking itself, I mean, what's been suggested here, can we really bifurcate this or not?
I would always support a way to be efficient and common sense with any project before the planning commission and the city more generally. Here we do have a pretty black and white municipal code requirement that requires that certified staking, when a project requires story pole staking, in the case of a design review project, that it be installed and certified by the licensed professional a minimum of 21 calendar days prior to the hearing date. That was unfortunately not done for the additional staking that was installed at the rear of the building. So we would respectfully request that the Planning Commission continue the project to a future hearing date in order to satisfy that code requirement.
Would we be able to sort of fast track that hearing date? They've already been working on this for 3 years. So is there some openings relatively in the near future that if we continue this, that they would be able to get on the agenda relatively quickly?
Absolutely. And if that's the direction of the Planning Commission before we close the hearing this evening, we can discuss possible continuance dates.
Okay.
So I just want to be clear in my own head here. Are there two issues with the staking? One was that the current staking wasn't done 21 days ahead. And the second issue is that we're changing the massing of the building, and that requires a restake anyway. I mean, can you clarify between those two things?
Correct. Both of those things are true. So there were a few additional stakes. It really was a small part of the project, but there was additional staking that was installed in that contrasting ribbon color at the rear of the building at one of the upper level residential units. Those additional stakes were installed less than 21 calendar days prior to this meeting. They're not in the plans that were analyzed in the staff report or posted online for your consideration this evening. And then the mirroring of the floor plan that Commissioner Whiten mentioned this evening, that would be a change to a a design review, essentially a change that's subject to design review approval. Those would be considered additions that are upper level and or over 15 feet in height, which does require design review approval and staking. Now, what we can do is discuss with the applicant how soon they can provide us with those revised floor plans and work on an expedient path to returning to the Planning Commission to review those revised plans. That would also give the neighbors that opportunity to review the story poles, assess the revised project from their perspective across the alley.
And do you start the 20-day period on the new story poles essentially from tomorrow? Meaning that there isn't any reduction in days for the number of days that they've already been up. It has to be noticed that the story poles, I think it was the green ribbon, is now the applicable project, and that's when the 21 days start.
Well, there are two components here.
Yeah,
They're gonna have to revise the plans, and then they have to have.
The issue of being late kind of disappears. It goes away anyway because they have to redo the poles for the new massing.
Yeah.
If that's what we agree upon. So we have to get to that point and.
Yeah, because there is a scenario where they go with the existing plan, don't flip the building, and then just deal with the little extension separately.
Okay, everybody done with questions? All right,
This was going to be easy.
yeah, I'll close the public hearing and we'll go to commissioner comments and discussion. Anybody in particular like to begin?
I'll start. So, it's been 3 years since we had your concept review, and I feel that your applicant team really listened to the input from not only the commission, but from the neighbors, and what you've submitted tonight, I feel really did address almost entirely all the issues or all the issues that we were reviewed 3 years ago, and has vastly improved the design. I want to also comment on noise issues. There's far more noise coming off of Coast Highway than what these units will generate. And I feel like, although, some of the neighbors may still be unhappy with what's being proposed, I think that the noise issue is kind of a non-issue because Coast Highway is extremely noisy, as we all know. And I do believe that the second story addition actually will benefit the neighbors because it will be screening a lot of that road noise from PCH. And as far as people without cars, I know a lot of younger people who do not have cars. They have no interest in having cars. And I think for many young people as well as seniors who don't drive anymore, that this would be a project that would certainly apply to their situations. I think the additional housing is a great thing for the city, although it's not going to be what would be considered affordable under market rate. I still think that it's, we're adding to the housing stock in the community, which is something that is a major issue, not only in California, but in the entire country. So that's something that I appreciate certainly. And as far as the color scheme, and I do want to take a look at your fascia and roof samples, because I know that the dark sort of, I'm going to just call it bronze color or whatever, can almost look black. And I know there's some options there. And so maybe if we can take a look at those, but I find that the color scheme overall really is suited to the architectural, contemporary architectural style that you've come up with. So with the exception of us potentially continuing this project, I would be able to, and I understand the change that Commissioner Whiten suggested, and it seems like that's an appropriate change to help setbacks for some of the neighbors directly behind the project. But overall, I understand that this may get continued, but I think it's a vastly improved project, and I'm very much in support of the direction you've taken on this.
Commissioner White, would you like to go next?
Should we look at the color at the samples before
Sure.
we go on?
Yeah, hang on. If you could maybe just pass it out and then explain them in the mic so everyone can hear them. And then for the public, after the planning commission is done looking at them, they'll be at the table. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. In the little envelope there, you'll find the original sample that we showed you at our meeting earlier. Yeah, and the ones that are proposed currently on the design. The smaller chips are alternatives that we brought so that you could consider that. I do remember that some of the commissioners expressed that the dark bronze color was maybe too dark, appearing black. So we found some alternatives that are a lighter bronze color. And if the commission felt strongly about one of those, we'd be happy to adopt them, but they're still well within our sort of color scheme range and offer some variety from the originally proposed dark bronze color. I also passed out the paint colors. There's a dark and a cream color. Yeah, there's kind of a dark gray and a cream color that would be the stucco colors.
Thank you for providing those for us.
Happy to.
Commissioner Whiten?
Yeah, okay. First, I'll congratulate you for being the first ones to take advantage of the new ordinance. I hope there are others in the pipeline. Are there? This is so long overdue.
There are at least a couple of projects that I'm aware of.
Good, great. Yeah, I think not only have you responded to the comments that were made at the last meeting, but you've taken advantage of these new development standards and you've exceeded them because the side setbacks on the north and south are not required. And so you elected to open that space and provide at least visual relief through their corridors on either side of the building, which is really a substantial give. You've reduced the square footage by about 25%. The mass and the bulk of the building is significantly reduced. And I think it sets a really high bar for what should be done. So congratulations, even if there is a little hiccup in this process. And the whole issue of mixed-use developments on Coast Highway is such an important one. And this neighborhood is a place that everybody would want to live if they could. And if you started thinking about the urbanized area from, say, Coast Highway along Coast Highway from, say, Diamond or Pearl through into, say, Jasmine, and applying this ordinance to those buildings, then we start, and including, of course, the downtown, then we start to feel more like a real walkable city. The HIP district is the only place in the city where it does really feel like a true pedestrian environment. It's very active, it's fun to be in, and it's always hard to find parking, but that's just the nature of being in Laguna Beach. I think the staff has already started studying where that second floor residential might occur. That there was some initial work done, I think, a couple of years ago. It's probably on hold now, but that is a reality, and I'm really happy to see this project before us tonight. The other obvious benefit is that it helps our RHNA numbers. RHNA 394 units. this isn't just a paper study. This is an actual project because, of course, we can just satisfy the RENA numbers by providing the plausibility study, the feasibility study. But this is actually going to be built. And it has a lot of support. Even the last version was supported by the Housing and Human Services Committee. And I'm sure they're not here tonight, but I'm sure they support it. And so, including our mayor. I think you have appropriately addressed the issues with the redesign of the building. And I can make all the design review criteria findings on access, design articulation, general plan compliance for expanding housing in the city, creating small-scale infill development, being pedestrian-oriented, providing art in public places. And I think the one issue of privacy is greatly improved in this version of your project. I think the flip would, just help it a little bit more. And I can also make the coastal development permit findings for the project. The other thing regarding the parking, the laundromat had constant turnover. That was a very busy situation in terms of traffic. I don't think this is going to be quite as busy because of the uses. The laundromat is just by nature in and out use, and the laundromat that's right up here on the corner, Glen and Legion, is really busy. I think this is going to improve the traffic situation. I think it's a great improvement. I think it shows us, sort of points us toward a future that's more urbanized, which we've been talking about for a long time. It's been stagnant in terms of getting anything done in terms of housing downtown. And I am extremely excited about this project and look forward to seeing more come before us.
Thank you, Commissioner Kellenberg. Chair
Well,
Kellenberg.
I think our main motion is probably going to be to continue this, right? I mean, we're not going to approve this tonight.
We should.
So there's, I might save a lot of my laudable comments for when you're coming back. And so we don't have to repeat it all over again. But the only comment I would make is that, we went through, there was a lot of work done to revise the code to allow projects like this to happen. And I remember when you were here before, I made the comment that, we should make this project a case study of what do we need to change, to actually make a mixed-use project possible in Laguna Beach. And it's really gratifying to yay to staff that actually happened. There was a study and the changes were made and it did make it possible for you to come back and have a viable project. And there are some stretches, but I think in order to get housing feasible in this town on small projects where there's no economy of scale, this thing, is financially very, very challenging. And we just know that. And so we have to kind of bend over backwards a little bit to allow these things to happen. And I think we should be willing to do that. And so I'm really happy that the process has actually occurred. We've made it work. And so I'm really happy if there's others that do come along. So I do think, though, I will make one comment. I would really request that, we have a street tree program in this town. Street trees are a very important part of the character of this town. And every time we have an opportunity to strengthen the street tree program, and the fact that there's retail there, that's a worn old argument that doesn't hold any water because the whole town is full of retail and great street trees. So I would hope that you would actually seriously look at a second street tree. That's all. But other than that, I think it's obviously supportive.
I'd just like to say one thing that the point of my comments in support are that I don't have any other changes that I would need to see to support this project other than the flip tonight. And that's up in the air, whether the rest of the commissioners agree with that. This other staking issue notwithstanding.
Commissioner Goldman.
I'm also highly supportive of the project for all the reasons that were articulated, so I'm not going to repeat those. What I would like to say, which hasn't been said, is a comment with regard to the impacts of the residents. You know, I always find the projects where we are looking at the rights of a building owner, a property owner, and the impact on the residents, which are also property owners. And I mean, the fact is, this property is eligible to do this project. They haven't come with more variances, so there by definition is going to be impact to the residences, which I'm sympathetic to. I think we're all sympathetic to. We listened to the residents' concern, and you know, this process I think worked very well because we had a concept review, residents and others talked, and I think the architect and the owner really did a nice job of whatever they could to minimize that impact. And they weren't trying to jam, you know, 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag. And so they minimized the impact to the residences. Notwithstanding that, I do recognize that residents are impacted there and they've enjoyed quality of experience there without this building expansion, and the building hopefully gets expanded and adds some residential use, and it's doing so in a way that's minimizing that impact. So, you know, the comment I want to make, it's not a deaf ear on when residents come up here and talk about these things, and I think you guys took this very seriously. I think from what I heard of the resident comment tonight, really the big impact is the additional cars in the street there, the alley, I don't know what we call it. And I actually think, I don't know if residents will have cars or not, but I think the way, as a practical matter, these spaces are going to work like resident spaces. And I think that probably minimizes the impact. There's less coming and going. As Susan pointed out with the laundromat, there would be more coming and going and more congestion. So, you know, as Joe said, it will work itself out. But I think the nature of the project, it's probably not going to be as impactful with cars coming in and out as it would be if it were just commercial, as a practical matter. So, you know, to the residents' point that all of these units will have cars, that may in fact be better. And, you know, that with the TDM, it's one less space too, so less congestion. So anyway, my comment is, I would, like what has been said, I would have been prepared to support this as is. I understand that, you know, we have a quirk in the process and we're coming back. But I really do think that this project was done in a way that is great for the city and minimizes the impact to the residences, which unfortunately there is impact to the residences. So.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And thanks to my fellow commissioners for their thoughtful comments. I'll, you know, kind of run through some of the stuff more, try to articulate, you know, my general support for the staff report and the findings that staff were suggesting for the design review criteria, making the findings for the coastal development permit, and finding for the CEQA exemption, all of which I agree with. I just think this is a great example of a project that really benefited from having a concept review, and really want to thank the applicant team for going through that process. And I think it was really very helpful to get this project to where it is here tonight. As part of that concept review, you know, the Planning Commission was generally supportive of just the concept of having this mixed use project with residential being part of it. You know, we suggested enhanced architectural articulation, which I think has been achieved. We had some issues regarding the tandem parking proposal, which has been removed from the project. And these code changes have allowed for this current proposal, you know, without requiring these density bonuses and eliminating any requests for variances. So that is great, and just that worked out that way. There was a request to, as best possible, to try to preserve the neighbors' views and privacy. And I think that those issues have been, as best as they can be mitigated, have been. Regarding the design review criteria, access, all these things were basically pointed out in the staff report, but some of them I found to be, clearly true and helpful. With access, that it's been improved with the parking lot configuration in the back and the markings that are proposed to clearly delineate, areas for the different uses. The bike lockers, I think, are a good idea, and the fact that this project is going to be made to be ADA compliant is great. The design articulation, I think, techniques were used, such as the offsets and terracing, to minimize the appearance of mass, and has improved the rear and side elevations in particular. The fact that we had gotten a letter from a member of the public that was saying, they were supportive of the project, and were saying that, that they thought it had been really very thoughtfully done, and that, the building could have been even expanded further back, more, increased in size and pushing further back towards the alleyway. And initially, I was looking at the plans that you guys have provided that was showing the additional building setback. And I'm saying, well, how's that going to happen without, violating that? And then becoming aware of that additional building setback no longer applies to this project. So the fact that you are basically meeting that, for the most part, is helping with the, both the design articulation and with the neighbors' concerns. The design integrity, I think it's high quality appearance due to the materials and detailing. Environmental context, again, as the staff report pointed out, that, basically the footprint is for the most part remaining unchanged, and the foundation is pretty much remaining unchanged. So there'll be very little grading or disturbance to the actual land there. General plan compliance, yeah, it meets all the plans, and in particular pointed out that certain housing and other elements, land use elements, were met. The landscape, I think the idea of having the cascading landscaping on the upper level deck and having that come over and the front elevation is nice. The fact that the improvements that are being made into the parking lot area are great. Lighting, glare, I think it's, appropriate. It's not excessive, and it's meeting the city standards regarding being downcast and meeting, good neighbor lighting standards. The pedestrian orientation, I think it's more pedestrian friendly. I think it's going to improve the pedestrian experience along the sidewalk there of Coast Highway. And, privacy impacts, again, I think have been minimized as much as possible. And I believe that's also the case with view equity. I'm supportive of your request to add the additional square footage as necessary to make each of these units fully ADA compliant. My concern again was I still don't quite understand. It seemed to me what you were showing was an expansion to the one residential number 4 unit there, and that popping out, and that unit is currently 700 square feet. So, and then you said something about it being equally distributed. So I'm not sure exactly how that all works out. However, that change alone is enough to the point where I would request that we continue this project and it come back in and it be restaked and the plans be revised and we go through the process as we should. But I'm also supportive of Commissioner Whiten's concept of flipping the plans. That is a really substantial change to, the massing of this building. I think, in concept, it's easy. It's like I just kind of flip it in my head, right? But it's a substantial change to how this property and this building will sit on this site, and plans should be revised to reflect that. Plans should be revised to reflect the request for this additional square footage, figuring out how to work that out so that none of these units exceed 700 square feet, because that would open up a whole nother can of worms. So That, you know, and I'll open for discussion, you know, we're still open for discussion amongst other commissioners here, but that would be my thinking. I think that if everybody else is supportive of the concept of flipping the plan and everybody else is supportive of the concept of adding this additional square footage as requested, I believe that the plan should be formally revised, resubmitted to the city. City staff has a time to evaluate those changes and whether or not it's triggering any other issues regarding parking or anything else, that it be restaked to reflect these changes to the plans and that it, you know, meet the normal staking process. So that's going to take some time. They're going to need some time to revise the plans. Once the plans are revised and resubmitted, I don't know if they wait for formal review from city staff or they just at that point would go to provide the staking as the plans are submitted. You know, that's a discussion between the applicant team and city staff to figure out the best way to approach that. But that would be, you know, my feeling on this, that would be the proper way that we deal with this. I don't think with changes these substantial that we can do it, and we really should do it any other way. So I just want to see if everybody else agrees with that.
I think we should
I
ask.
think staff has already supported that notion that if we change the massing, I think there's no question it has to be restaked and go through the process.
Former Chair Sadler, can I comment?
Sure, that's what we're asking for.
This is only related to the color samples. I don't know if we want to save that for another time or.
No, we might as well. I mean, if we're going to.
The only one I have comment on is I'd like to, the two small samples you provided for the fascia and I believe for the roof material, the very light, whatever the lightest one is the one I would recommend.
I'd be supportive of that.
Yep. Maybe we should ask the applicant if they really want to go through the plan revision.
I think as far as I'm concerned, their only option would be to go with the plans that have been provided here as part of the staff report tonight, which doesn't reflect this additional request for square footage. So that's the options as I see. They can have us.
My understanding, I have a question. My understanding is there is no proposal to increase the square footage. All you're going to do is flip the plan and all the units stay the same size.
Is the ADA bathroom
can they-
required for all 4 bathrooms?
If I might quickly clarify one point to Chair Kellenberg's question.
I've asked 2 questions actually that were rolled over, but.
Let me know if I have answered only one of the 2.
Sure.
So the applicant's presentation this evening included a bump out at one of the upper floor residential units to accommodate one ADA compliant unit in accordance with building code requirements. So there'd be one unit that would be ADA compliant, one of the 4 being proposed on that second floor. That expansion of that upper unit, city staff hasn't reviewed those plans, but the commissioners that went to the site prior to tonight did see that additional staking. And then the other piece to this discussion this evening is the staking for the flipping of the floor plan. Now, one point that I wanted to clarify for the commission, applicant, and the general public is that when a project is continued with design review direction to modify an aspect of the project, whether it's in response to a view consideration, privacy consideration, or some other consideration by the Planning Commission, the restaking and recertifying period is reduced from 21 days to 14 days. And we'll factor for that when we discuss a continuance date with the applicant.
And my second question was, and I guess I'm wrong because everybody was saying I was wrong, that the idea of flipping the building over, I thought was generally keeping the plan square footage similar. And so you wouldn't exceed the 700 square feet.
The 700 square feet could potentially be exceeded because they asked for this 2'4" extension of the plans.
Well, but they're not going to exceed 700 square feet. I can guarantee you that.
No. They won't.
Well, yeah, they just have to figure it out.
Yeah.
They have to, if they have to adjust between, walls between the units or whatever, they're going to have to.
I think what the architect was saying was they showed that bump out just to indicate that there's additional footage, not that it is added to that 700 square foot unit.
Yeah.
But that needs to be carefully
Yes.
evaluated.
Well, yeah.
Well,
Can
let's see.
you open
Let's
it?
make sure that we've got general consensus on, basically, we have general consensus, okay? So I'll reopen the public hearing if there's something or question you'd like to ask, or.
Yeah, let me give you another concept. First, here's the problem. When we first we have to find somebody to do the staking, and it's the summer. And it took us a long time to get this person to do it. If we take the time it's going to take to get somebody to stake, then we have staff that needs to go through the revised plans and prepare the plans. We're talking 60 to 90 days, realistic. And frankly, we need to get going. So one of the thoughts that Anders and I had was that we come back, that you consider the proposal as submitted, period. And that we'll come back to you with the flipping and with the additional size as a separate basically application, separate proposal. Because you have what's in front of you. We've been, doing like the flipping, we think is a great idea. We like the idea. But we don't like it if it's going to mean another 60 or 90 or 120 days of waiting. So, and we can come back.
Just to clarify, what you're saying is that if we were to approve the plan with or without a condition then, or anyway, by giving some approval tonight, it allows you to move ahead with the project.
Exactly.
And then you can come back with revisions later.
Right.
But it doesn't hold up the whole project when
Correct.
we do that.
Correct.
Is staff comfortable with that? But I think part of the problem isn't it a building code requirement that one of these units be ADA compliant? And at this point, as the plans are currently provided, that is not going to happen.
Correct. Based on the plans that city staff had reviewed and cleared for tonight's hearing, based on the applicant's assessment, and I understand that they probably received guidance from the city's building division, there is a real constructability issue related to accessibility requirements that the project is subject to that are being addressed by this bump out on the second floor. And hence why the applicant included that information in tonight's presentation to the commission. And that's the purpose of the additional story poles that were installed. Now, what I will say is, from city staff's point of view, the flipping of the second floor plan is a much more dramatic change to the project than the 2-foot bump out. And the bump out has already been staked. While it would not be my opinion that the Planning Commission can approve that bump out tonight, it has been staked and certified at this point. If you were to continue the project to the next hearing or the first meeting in August, I do think that the staking requirements and other applicable requirements have been satisfied. I probably would recommend the August 6th hearing because we do still want to confirm that we've carefully reviewed the proposed plans for conformance with all applicable development standards to the project.
So what you're saying is we could approve the project. We could approve the project as presented with the bump out.
No, he's
But,
saying.
well, hang on, but the bump out requires more runway to get a formal approval at the August 6th meeting. Meaning we wouldn't be discussing anything other than just coming back and saying, okay, time has passed, sufficient time has passed, and we approve the project.
Thanks for the question, Commissioner. So the project would be continued in its entirety.
Oh, so it's
tonight.
still a continuance?
That is
scenario.
correct, yes. And then the Planning Commission can discuss and deliberate whether it wants to, as the commission majority, also direct the applicant to redesign the project to mirror the upper level to address the concerns raised by Commissioner Whiten.
And so what you're saying, Anthony, in essence, is there's no option tonight other than continuance? Sounds like what you just said.
The option to approve would be subject to approval on the plans presented this evening,
Right,
which isn't what the applicant wishes to do.
Well, I was just going to
unfortunately.
ask that question. If they decided, well, we're still within the setbacks and all the applicable policies and guidelines to keep the project exactly as it is. In other words, don't flip the upper floor. Would we be able to approve the project even with that bump out?
No.
No.
Not this evening, but the applicant's concerns with retaining a staking company to install the story poles and process a more significant redesign, that would all be obviated if the continuance hearing is simply to approve the project with the bump out. Now, that may not be what the commission wishes to do, but that is one option.
Well, it would also be predicated on what the applicant wants to do. Because they could have that
request a
option.
decision
Right.
this evening.
Well, that would be my suggestion then. My suggestion then, it would be that we continue this to the August 6th meeting with the direction that with the approval of the additional square footage as requested. And they would basically come, and with the only other change being the change to the color that you have suggested, Commissioner Dubin. And they come back at that meeting and they would, we'd vote on it at that point.
And it essentially means no flip.
I mean, no flip at this point.
Yeah.
And then if all goes according to plan, it gives, and then we continue it, gives staff the time and ability to review it for other code compliance issues. And then they would come back on that meeting. We would vote on it. If we approve it, then they have their approval. And they can then, keep moving at that point. And at that next meeting, we can mention, yes, now we're officially approving it with this bump out or square footage extension, and suggest that they carefully consider making revisions to the plan to do that flip or something.
But that would require another continuance, wouldn't it?
No.
Well, no.
They'd have their approval and stuff, and then they could come back in later with a revised project. Correct? Anthony, would that?
They do that?
Yes. At that point, they would have an approval, so there would be no requirement that they return. But yes, that the applicant would certainly be within their rights to request subsequent design review approval for a modified project.
But we couldn't condition our approval at the next meeting on them doing that. So we would basically be making a request and then hoping that the applicant comes back in with revisions later.
That's exactly right. You are essentially finding that the project with simply the bump out satisfies all applicable design review criteria, and there isn't necessarily a need to mirror that upper level floor plan.
That sounds kind of like the best we can do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, I have a question. The staking is expedited on the second time around. What about the application, a new application for the same project where they're making some changes? Can that be an expedited process?
Staff will certainly commit to expediting to the extent that we can. It would still be a 21-day staking period. We can work with the applicant. It will be a new application, so we'll work with them on an aggressive timeline separate from this hearing. You wouldn't be continuing to a date certain. The applicant would be filing a new application, and we would move as quickly as possible on that project.
Okay, so if we make a motion with the condition that we are approving the 2-foot 4-inch extension as outlined in the applicant's presentation tonight, and the change in the color as suggested by Commissioner Dubin, then we're good to go. No,
We need to.
we're not conditioning because we're just continuing. Right?
Continuing.
So we're continuing with that direction.
So moved.
I'll make that a motion.
Do you want to make sure the applicant's okay with that process?
I'll open the public hearing and please.
No, we appreciate the consideration really and the conclusion. And we will do the bump out. Not the bump out, but the flip,
Flip.
but that's separate.
That's separate.
As a practical matter, getting the approval allows you to commit to things to do, because the flip is going to require another approval, which slows down your process. But getting the approval and then getting the flip for the
Yeah.
approval going forward is the most efficient way for you to proceed?
It is. And what we'll be doing, frankly, is changing the plans before you see them even. And we've got a contractor who's out as we speak, getting numbers from subs. We'll have them get numbers on this change so that basically, the drawings are going to be underway and things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
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 Is that a motion?
So I move that we continue this item 6.1 at 1040 South Coast Highway to the August 6th.
Chair, if I may, or Commissioner Sadler, I should say. It might be worthwhile, given the applicant's concerns about timing, having a brief dialogue about the continuance date. I do wonder, since plans have already been prepared for the bump out, they still need to be reviewed by staff, but we have those plans. I think what we could do is try to make it work for the July 16th Planning Commission meeting. If we need to, absolutely need to, we will request a continuance to August 6th. But tonight, as I sit here, I do think that that's an attainable target for us.
Okay, I'll open the public hearing to the applicant team. How does that sound to you?
Better. Yeah.
July 16th, was that?
Correct.
Okay. I move that we continue item 6.1 at 1040 South Coast Highway to the July 16th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting with the direction to the applicant that the plans are allowed to be modified for the 2-foot, 4-inch extension as outlined in your presentation earlier this evening, and that the color change as suggested by Commissioner Dubin be incorporated into the project.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sadler,
Yes.
Commissioner Whiten.
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin.
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Goldman,
Yes.
Chair Kellenberg.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. They're continued to that meeting.
You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Plus we're down to 390 units now.
4 more units. All right. Well,
Hooray.
every little bit helps. Okay, we'll move on to other business. If there is any other business.
There is no other business this evening.
Okay, are there any committee, commissioner, staff reports or comments from Commissioner Dubin?
I have a question.
The fire station was appealed to Coastal Commission,
Okay,
just so you know, as well as the promenade.
Oh, and who was the appellant?
Our friend Ann Christoph and somebody else.
okay.
I have a question.
And let me just follow up on that.
Fire station.
I've been working a lot with Morris Skandarian on all these refinements. We had a meeting today with Tom, the architect, Morris and myself. They have incorporated the 5-foot move, leaving the gym where it is, so the gym actually gets larger. What Morris and I have been working on is collecting material samples for review with the full Planning Commission at some point, because obviously there's been issues with leaving that to Public Works to make those determinations. So there'll be plenty of samples for our review when that happens, along with the landscape plan.
Great.
I have a question. to Patrick and Anthony regarding, I was reading Governor Newsom and CEQA. I'm curious, your views on this, how it will impact our process. Will things be materially expedited? What do you think will be the impact?
So I'll be honest, my plate at the city is relatively full. I've of course seen the headlines, the kind of the news blurbs from the various law firms have started to trickle out. It is my understanding the big, huge headline of totally revamp, at least in my very, very preliminary, maybe slightly overstated, but that's kind of a long-winded way to say we haven't really dug into it yet, but of course we will and effectuate those laws, and I'll defer to Mr. Planning Manager if he's done his homework better than me for tonight.
I don't have any information to share tonight. I did, as Pat did, see the headlines come through. This was squeezed into the budget that the legislature adopted. There are CEQA changes to when prevailing wages apply. I know some labor groups are not so happy with the changes, but they're all with the purpose of expediting development projects to make housing construction in particular, hopefully less expensive moving forward. There are changes to CEQA and that's the main thing that's on my radar. I haven't closely looked at this, and I don't think it's so much for single family, but multifamily development, and we'll know more in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, it seemed from what I was reading that it was referring to urban infill, and I was just wondering, would any of Laguna Beach be considered as being urban infill? Or?
Yes, unless it's being defined differently for the purpose of this specific bill. The city of Laguna Beach is considered to be an urbanized area, as much of southern coastal California is.
Well, I know there's a reference tonight about it, but on this project or previous project that we were talking about. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I guess a project like this, in theory, we wouldn't even have to have a CEQA discussion.
Correct. Now, once again, that's the CEQA discussion is a bit different than the other discretionary approvals, whether that be design review or the CDP, and at least based off of a excellent legal research, which is Control F in the bill. There's no real reference here to, hey, this is going to exempt the Coastal Act, or the Coastal Act no longer applies. What it really does is remove that kind of potential CEQA sword, so to speak, to, hey, someone's going to jam up just by using a CEQA lawsuit. And this, to me, seems to, as Mr. Planning Manager said, grab a whole host of projects where that option is no longer going to be available.
Yeah, but don't you think it'll be tied up in the courts forever?
I mean, I can't. Yeah, I mean,
we've got our fire station. Our dinky little fire station goes to the Coastal Commission.
Yeah, but
I mean, come on.
It's funny, Susan, because I was going to ask that question too. By appealing to the Coastal Commission, as a practical matter, what does that do to the process? I mean, does it?
What was there?
No. This is. I'm jumping back. I'm
correct.
Using my ADD to just move around from conversation to conversation. This is the conversation about George saying that the fire station and the promenade were appealed.
Coastal development permit that they are appealing, although I don't see how coastal staff will look at that and find any substantial issue with.
But does it cause a delay?
Correct. Yeah. And so if I may,
Yeah.
Commissioner Dubin kind of hit the nail kind of right on the head. The appeal to coastal is almost a two-step process. So you're right. It does provide some modicum of delay. I'm trying to think of the calendar day deadline. Is it 39 days they have to schedule the substantial issue hearing, or 40? Anyway.
I thought it was within 60.
Maybe 60. Okay, maybe you're right. And so it's kind of a two-step. Staff brings it to the Coastal Commission whether there's a substantial issue. And that's kind of, hey, is there some issues here worth checking out? If the Coastal Commission says no, then it's good to go. If they say yes, then obviously that potential delay is much more substantive and lengthy.
Great. All right. Would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting on July
16th?
I will move that we adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting on July 16th.
Is there, Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sadler,
Yes.
Commissioner Whiten,
Yes.
Commissioner Dubin,
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Goldman,
Yes.
Chair Kellenberg.
Yes.
We are officially adjourned. Thank you all.
Very smooth, Nancy.
You-
Ex officio.